Welcome to the Be All You Can Be MSC, the podcast dedicated to empowering Army Medical Service Corps officers and professionals like you. I'm your host, Stephanie Moore. On today's episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast, we have a special guest today, Lieutenant Colonel Ann Rudick. She is a distinguished Army officer, and she is a 6'7" Foxtrot, which that area concentration is optometry. Ann has dedicated herself to improving vision care for soldiers and advancing the readiness and resiliency of our force. She is also a certified Army coach for the professional development of others. Ann, it is a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for the invitation to be on the podcast. I'm super excited to talk with you today.
Absolutely, and so am I. So let's start. Tell us a little bit about your Army experience.
Yeah, sure. So I joined the Army on a health profession scholarship program, which is pretty typical for optometrists to enter the military. So I was in my first year of optometry school and talked to a recruiter and then was selected for the scholarship. And then from there, really, I've practiced optometry in a lot of different environments, from the deployed setting to small clinics to large medical centers, and then even did some broadening work in human resources. And it's just been a great career so far.
Awesome. So I understand from just doing a little bit of research on you, you went to Ohio State. So welcome. You're my first Buckeye on. So I'm excited
All
to
right.
have you on simply because my husband is from Ohio. So ultimately, I have to be a fan of all things Ohio because of it.
Yay. Go Bucks.
So tell us a little bit more about what like a typical day is like for an optometrist in the Army.
Yeah, so it really depends on your particular assignment. But if you're a clinical optometrist, which most of us are, your hours are pretty regular as far as like an outpatient clinic. So from 7:30 to about 4, optometrists will probably see patients every 20 to 30 minutes during that time, and may have hours for sick call early in the morning if you're at an installation with trainees. And some optometrists will even pool on-call hours with support to an emergency room. So it can be a little bit varied, but pretty regular most times.
Now, in addition to the clinical side, we also have operational units. We actually have an optometry unit, which is a 6-man team out there. Have you experienced with the optometry detachments?
Yes, definitely. So I was assigned to an optometry detachment as my first duty assignment, and there it's really very mission dependent as far as what you can expect. Even optometrists that are in our operational units will often have some patient care that they provide in a local military treatment facility as well.
Yeah, it was interesting with those optometry detachments, and I want to just mention it because I think it's important, especially for our 70 series medical service corps officers, that they exist. It's a 6-man team, which is super small, but they're a deployable detachment that is either assigned to a theater medical command or a medical brigade. And ultimately, then they can be further attached down even to an MMB or possibly even a BCT, which I thought was really interesting because the last thing you think of when it comes to at the operational and tactical level is someone's vision. But that is so key and critical to the warfighter. And so I really didn't appreciate the optometrist from that perspective, other than the fact that I had the ability as a lieutenant that I ran into an optometry detachment and was like, oh, wow, why would you have an optometrist far forward? But I'm sure anybody that's either had something in their eye or pink eye at some point can appreciate how important your vision is.
Yes, definitely, Stephanie. So optometrists really are primary eye care providers in the operational setting. And so we push as far forward as possible. And even our small, mighty 6-man teams are capable of splitting into 3-man teams to do split operations. And that was how it was for me when I was deployed to Iraq. So I had myself and then an eye technician, an enlisted technician, and an enlisted optical fabricator with me. And so we were capable of pretty much like lens crafters doing an eye exam, treating whatever injury or stabilizing whatever injury a soldier may have presented with downrange, to then making their glasses and getting it to them right then and there.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And myself as a medical logistics officer, I'd be curious, is there anything that we need to know or our meadows and the BCTs need to know as far as like planning factors with that regard or any special consideration if they ever do run across an optometry team?
Yeah, because we are so small, we really do rely on our higher headquarters for support. So we don't have everything that we need to be self-sufficient. So for IT, for movement capability, for that lifeline support, we really do rely on our next higher echelon for support. And so that can be in many forms, but we are not able to just stand alone. And so we do require some of our meadows to help us out.
Well, thank you for filling us in on that. I think it's always important when we talk about different units across the battlefield, especially medical, that most of them are not independent in supporting themselves. And those are all critical planning factors that we need to make sure that we address. So I'd be curious, like, why did becoming an optometrist in the Army resonate with you?
Yeah, so thinking back to optometry school, I was already at Ohio State when I joined the Army, and the catchphrase for Ohio State at that time was do something great. And I couldn't think of a better way to enact that in my own life than to join the military and to take care of soldiers, because I truly believe to this day that our service members are really the best patients in the world. And it's so rewarding to take care of them. And so that's what drove me to that. I also have always had a really adventurous spirit, and the thought of being able to practice optometry in different countries and be exposed to different cultures and different environments of care really resonated with me too.
That's awesome. I love that saying, do something great. So, could you walk us through that process of joining the Army as an optometrist and what are the different options?
Absolutely. Yeah. So most optometrists will come in on a health profession scholarship program, but that's not the only pathway. Our health profession scholarships do come in various forms. It can be a 1, 2, 3, or 4 year scholarship with your active duty service obligation dependent upon the length of your scholarship. And so that starts with talking with an AMED recruiter. And then we also have a direct accession pathway where providers who are already practicing optometry and are interested in becoming an Army officer can join as an optometrist through a direct accession route. And then the third option really is for those in ROTC who are interested in becoming optometrists. It is possible to complete ROTC and then do an educational delay and then either go to optometry school and come back in or apply for an HPSP scholarship in conjunction with that ROTC obligation.
Thanks for laying that out, especially with the educational delay. I wasn't actually aware of the ROTC educational delay until the last couple of years of my career. That's been really insightful to know that option exists. So I appreciate you highlighting that. So, how does the Army support ongoing education and training for its optometrists since you all are also healthcare providers?
So there are really a wealth of educational options available to us as optometrists. And so the Army does have clinical residency programs, which are not a requirement to practice optometry in the civilian or the military sector, but we do have 6 different residency options every year available to Army optometrists, and those have varying kind of specialties. So you can complete a residency in TBI or neurooptometry. You can complete a residency in ocular disease or in specialty contact lenses. So those are different options that are after optometry school and that an Army optometrist can take advantage of really at any point in their career. So that's one really great thing that the Army offers. In addition to that, we have a number of long-term health education and training programs to pursue master's degrees, MBA, MHA, or MPH, whether it be through a school of choice option or through the Army Baylor program. We do offer those opportunities as well. And we actually have a PhD option for optometrists who are interested in going more in a research track. And so the Army does support one PhD start annually.
I'd be curious, which one of these opportunities did you actually take advantage of?
So I did both a clinical residency. I completed that at BAMC in San Antonio. And then I also did a master's program through the long term health education school of choice option. So I went back to Ohio State and got a master's in healthcare administration.
That's awesome, especially getting to go back to your alma mater and having that time also to be a student and spend time with your family. How did you enjoy the clinical residency?
It was great. I came into the Army and deployed pretty much right out of optometry school, and then was in an assignment after that where I was the only optometrist. And so, doing a residency at that point in my career, I had been practicing for a couple years, but I felt like I wanted to more fully develop my skills. And so, I went to BAMC then and got to work with some of the premier clinicians who were fitting specialty medical contact lenses at that point for soldiers who had been injured in combat. And it was great to learn that skill set and expand my practice capability.
It sounds fascinating, and it's great to know that there's like a staggered educational opportunities throughout your Army career as a healthcare provider, because I know that's important to feel like you're continuing not only to expand your education and knowledge base as a clinician, but also that you're in keeping with like the civilian sector. So I appreciate you sharing more insight to that. So, since you are also the deputy consultant for optometry to the Army Surgeon General, I think this is a perfect question for you. What unique career development opportunities does the Army offer to optometrists?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in conjunction with some of our educational programs, specifically the master's programs, we'll usually have an opportunity to complete a utilization tour in potentially another specialty area. So, that's how I ended up working in human resources. So, after my MHA degree, I was assigned to Human Resources Command as a healthcare HR professional, and it was great to see just how the behind the scenes works for assignments and promotions and basically all aspects of an officer's career. And so those opportunities are typically available. And in addition to that, we do have some short courses that optometrists can attend that are also really beneficial. Some of like the AMED executive skills course, that is a track that is really I think helpful, especially for our mid-careerists to look into. And then specifically for advanced training, again, we have the ocular trauma course, which is through USU. And that is a short course that optometrists can go to just to amplify our knowledge and ability to perform traumatic care or to stabilize trauma patients. And so those are all kind of different ways that I feel like we have opportunities to develop into a more well rounded officer.
And so I know you were at HRC in your last assignment, and I know now you are at the Office of the Surgeon General. So, for the audience, how do you maintain your clinical or your credentialing to continue to actually be able to see patients throughout your career?
Absolutely. That is so important to me personally. I do miss being in the clinic. And so I make sure to carve out time and see patients a couple days a month. So when I was at Fort Knox, I worked at the Ireland Army Health Clinic. And here I'm credentialed through Fort Belvoir and start seeing patients there soon. So definitely important to carve out that time. And it continues to fuel my passion and, of course, to take care of soldiers.
That's awesome. And so, because I asked that question, I'd be curious what other things are different from working as an optometrist in the Army versus potentially in civilian practice.
So practicing as an optometrist in the Army is a lot more dynamic and diverse. I think because we move around and also our patients move around, and depending on where we're assigned, our patient population may be a little bit different. So we may be in one location and only see active duty service members, and then we move to another assignment where they see retirees and family members. And so you really still have to keep up all of your skills as far as being able to see pediatric patients and being able to manage complex ocular diseases that you may see more in a retired population because you just never know what's going to come into your chair. And you may think service members are all young and healthy, but sometimes you'll be surprised too. And so compared to clinical practice, it's just a lot more dynamic and I think exciting because you do have that variety.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So, what unique broadening opportunities or assignments does the Army offer optometrists then?
So, in addition to our clinical roles and our operational roles, optometrists can serve in command, battalion, or brigade command, as well as command our optometry detachments. And then, in addition to that, optometrists also have the opportunity to do research, to teach at the Med Center of Excellence, training our eye techs and our optometry new graduates. And then also, they have the opportunity to serve as residency directors for some of our graduate medical education programs. So there's really just a wealth of opportunities out there in addition to clinical practice.
I'll piggyback. They also are also competitive for primary military education. So resident CGSC in Fort Leavenworth and also the Army War College for Senior Service College. I appreciate the fact you're highlighting that because just like any other medical service corps officers, optometrists are medical service corps officers and Army leaders. So they can also take that leadership path if they choose.
Absolutely.
And so, how do you believe that Army optometrists impact the overall mission of the Army health system? I know we talked a little bit about that, but I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Army optometrists are the frontline eye care providers. So, really, we can be thought of much like primary care, where vision readiness really is our mission. And we are the ones that update med pros and make sure our warfighters have the glasses that they need, whether it be in garrison or when they're getting ready to deploy. And so, really, our mission is always focused on sustaining vision readiness and sustaining the warfighter.
I appreciate you highlighting that. You are a critical component of health service support, which is a portion of Army health system. So I appreciate you bringing that to light. So, what advice would you give someone considering a career as an optometrist in the Army? Like, where should they start? Or what have you learned along the way that you wish someone would have told you?
Serving in the Army has really opened so many doors in my life. The educational opportunities, the friendships, the connections you'll make, the experiences you'll have, they are really all priceless. And so, if you're considering joining the Army as an optometrist, definitely start with an AMED recruiter. Ask all the questions, have them connect you with a currently serving optometrist. We are an extremely tight knit community, and we always are seeking to welcome new members.
And so, what misconceptions about being an optometrist in the Army is there that you'd like to address? Because I feel like a lot of people have some preconceived notions, if you will.
So this may not be specific to optometry, but a lot of my professional friends have communicated that how can you be in the Army as a woman, and how do you balance that with career and family? And so in general, I do think there's still this misconception that maybe the military is not very family friendly, especially for women. But this has really not been my experience at all. So I've found the military to be very accommodating, especially when it comes to having my children. I was able to have two kids, breastfeed them, and be there for them when they were sick, participate in school events, take them to doctor's appointments. And so, really, it's been to me very flexible and very accommodating. And I really wouldn't trade that for anything.
I appreciate you sharing that insight as a mom myself, because it seems to be a common question like, how can you be in the Army and be a mom or and be a spouse? But in a lot of ways, it's just like other jobs, right? Some other jobs out there in the corporate world require a lot of travel too. So I equate it to that. And some other jobs actually require even as high as risk as being an infantry officer or field artillery. So I think that's a great thing to share, and I appreciate you sharing that. One thing, I'm going to go a little off the cusp with you, Anne, so don't get too uncomfortable. When I met you, it was actually a little bit virtually and through your boss, who I also work with, but we met virtually going through the Army coaching program, which is to essentially be a coach specifically to help people work through whatever they've got going on, whether it's a little bit of career or challenges, so that they can see areas of opportunity to help themselves. That really stood out to me when you and I got to finally meet face to face and talk. You have a real passion for helping others. I thought it was interesting at the same time you also were at HRC, which to me it was like the universe was putting you at the right place at the right time. You seem to have also had a real passion for working at HRC. So it's impressive to see that you are not just embracing the clinical component, but you've also embraced the being a Army leader. And that is also a key part is investing in others. And so I just want to say thank you. I appreciate that passion that you shared that day and that we've had some really great conversations about that.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I think it was the perfect time for me to be at HRC during kind of the People First initiative, because that's really what I believe in and have always believed in, putting our people
Abs-
first.
Absolutely. All right. So, Anne, is there anything that we missed about optometry that you would like to highlight to the folks out there or folks interested in becoming optometrists?
The one thing I guess that maybe I didn't touch on or we didn't touch on is really how interconnected our optometry community is. And so, whether you're considering joining the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, really in recent years, we've had a great deal of collaboration across the services. And I think that's been really positive. And so, if you're considering joining any of the services, we work really well together and we collaborate really well together. And so, I think that's something that's potentially unique in our career field.
Absolutely. And to include on the research side, there is joint research ongoing in the field of optometry. So I do appreciate you bringing that up. All right, let's switch over to some fun questions then. The first one is best career advice you've either ever received or given, or both.
Wow. Okay. That's tough. I think I'm going to have a couple here. So, one is one of our former optometry consultants used to say, life is about timing and choices. And that kind of always stuck with me because it reminds me that sometimes there's an element of chance or luck in life and in our careers, but often there's an element of choice too. And so sometimes everything just seems to line up, but there may be times where you have to consider your priorities and make the right decision. So, that's always stuck with me. Another piece of advice, and this actually came from reading Michelle Obama's book, The Light We Carry, is to do important work in a joyful way. And that was something that really was important for me at HRC because it really was important work when we were considering assignments and things that really have the potential to impact a service member, but not just a service member, but also their families. And so that I think is really important to just keep that in mind. And then lastly, this was something that came to me during our coaching course. And I think it's been really helpful to me is to always assume the best intentions of everyone. And so that's been really freeing for me just to think like very positively and just to always assume that someone is coming from a place of goodness. And so that's something that I always share with future leaders or fellow leaders because that can be so important just in our day-to-day dynamics, dealing with peers, superiors, subordinates, and just really keeping our cool and calm and peace.
I love that advice, all three of them, but I specifically like the always assume the best intentions. I think it can keep you from being a reactive and an emotional leader, which at the end of the day, we as leaders set the tone. So I love that advice. Thank you for sharing that incredible advice. All right. So, what is a fun fact about you? And if you don't have one, tell us what your favorite ice cream is.
Ooh. Well, I do really like ice cream. But I would say my fun fact is that my family immigrated from Poland between 1900 and 1920. And so I speak a little bit of Polish. And so that's been fun.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me something, anything in Polish.
Okay. Dziękuję za wysłuchanie. That means thanks for listening.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now, just because I know you're a huge ice cream fan and I have heard some crazy ice cream flavors, what's your favorite flavor?
Well, if you ever go to Ohio, there's an ice cream place called Grader's. They sell it in some supermarkets too. But Buckeye Blitz is absolutely the best ice cream in the world. It is chocolate and peanut butter, and it's just a whole lot of goodness.
Nice. Well, thank you, Anne, so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been insightful, fun. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Stephanie. This has been great. And thanks again for the invitation to be on your podcast. And just happy to share everything that I can about our wonderful Army optometry community.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Don't miss the next episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast. Subscribe now and join our vibrant community of ambitious professionals who are taking their careers to the next level. The opinions shared on this podcast are the personal opinions of the guests and the hosts. They do not reflect the official position of the Medical Service Corps, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.